Hi everyone, I'm Swift, and today I'm going to be talking about Anastasia, the movie, the girl, and the tendency we humans have to wish for happy endings for the royal children left in the crosshairs of political upheaval. Funnily enough, I didn't actually see Don Bluth's Anastasia until I was an adult in college. I was always much more of a swan princess kind of girl when it came to the non-Disney animated princesses. When I first saw it about a decade ago, I remember finding it boring, forgettable, and generally annoying from a historical standpoint. I was an arrogant college kid taking classes on the Cold War and George Orwell, and I know I can be quite pretentious about historical stuff, but it always just struck me as a bit weird that they chose Anastasia to make a sparkly princess movie about. A fantastical, happy retelling of a real-life girl who died horribly? That just struck me as being in bad taste, kind of like Pocahontas. That being said, a lot of people love the movie, and at the suggestions of you lovely viewers, I decided to give it another look. I know that for a lot of people, this is their favorite movie, and there are some very clear reasons why. As a story set firmly in the real world, with theoretically realistic stakes, the film appeals to those who are less keen on the fantasy nature that comes with most princess movies. The rotoscope technology used to capture the character's movement is impressive and way better implemented than it is in some other films. The music is charming and memorable, especially Once Upon a December and In the Dark of the Night. And there are a few scenes with some truly cool ideas, like the use of an impressionist painting style in the background of Paris. Anastasia herself is a refreshing character, and Dimitri is charming in a proto-Flynn Rider sort of way. But oh my god, do the historical inaccuracies ruffle my feathers. On rewatching the movie to make this script for the first time in like 7 years, I was floored by how bad it was historically. Like, the first 5 minutes of the film are just so insulting to all parties involved. They are insulting to the Russian people who incited revolution, since, apparently, now they only did so because Rasputin cast an evil spell. They are insulting to the real Romanov family whose tragic deaths weren't anything like what was pictured. They are insulting to the people who suffered first under the Romanovs and then under the Soviet Union, since apparently everything was dandy in Russia before the revolution. Things are only gray in St. Petersburg since the revolution. Just, God help me, who wrote that line? Like, I expected some thick rose-tinted glasses to be dropped on the Romanovs, since they have to be fully pure and lovable for the sake of making it into a simple kids movie. But damn, Lenin who? Is Lenin ever even mentioned in this movie? No? He's not? How do you make a movie about the girl whose family was killed by communists without ever mentioning the communists? It's so whack. But then I looked up the history of how this film was made and why Fox Studios chose Anastasia as their debut story. And I found a group of passionate artists who worked under difficult conditions to create a classic fairy tale that people of all ages could enjoy. These were people who wanted to make a kids movie, but were only given access to a small number of adult stories, a fraction of the budget needed, and were caged in by an uncooperative parent company. On learning about this, I realized that maybe I was a bit harsh. This wasn't like Pocahontas or Hunchback, where they had unlimited resources and could choose whatever IP they wanted, and then instead chose willingly to rewrite history and to be racist. This was taking lemons and making lemonade. Or rather, taking a 1956 live-action movie about a real-life death and making a strong female lead who makes her own destiny. This was a movie that had a lot more to say than just bad history lessons. And a lot can be said about the real Anastasia herself. One aspect of the myth of Anastasia that has always intrigued me is the mysticism behind her possible survival. As the child of a bad regime, she is an innocent of circumstance. She is young and therefore blameless for her parents' crimes, but must be punished for them just the same. And unfortunately for her, and many other royal children in history, that price usually is death. From the Tudor Tower princes to the Dauphine of France, many royal children have been killed to protect the new ruling power. This cruelty is a consequence of the cold truth that if these children were allowed to live, it would only cause problems for the next regime. As royalty, the child and their descendants would have a claim to the right to rule. There might even be loyalists who would take advantage of them for that. But despite that cold, hard truth, we can't help but imagine a hopeful scenario where Anastasia and these other children lived. There's a magic in there being royalty, and a tragedy in such an ancient family line dying, and the even greater tragedy of the murder of a child. As humans, we want to believe in hope, in the possibility that somehow these children found their way to safety, In Anastasia's case, rumors that she might have lived were widespread, and there were a few successful con women who benefited from them. However, with the discovery of the Romanov mass grave in 1991, it became clear that she probably hadn't survived. And even then, it was generally assumed that she hadn't lived long before that discovery. So, just like when something goes wrong in our shows, it's up to fan fiction, or fiction, to right this wrong and to find a way to let her live. The result is not just the 1997 Anastasia, but also many other adaptations of her story. But most remarkably, this isn't unique to Anastasia. The Dauphine of France and the Tudor Tower Princess are probably the other most famous examples of royal children who died terribly, but who live on, or don't, in fiction. This video on Anastasia is the first in a series where I'm going to talk about the real-life history of all three of these cases and some of the most famous adaptations of their stories. In Anastasia's case, I'll be covering both the 1997 movie and the musical adaptation. Should be a fun little research project to work on fresh off my thesis. Apologies in advance if I mispronounce any of the Russian names or words. I tried to research beforehand how to say these things, but know that I am far from perfect. Also, it should go without saying, but the first half of this video is going to go into some very heavy topics, since it's basically on the murder of children. If that is understandably upsetting to you, please consider skipping ahead when I indicate, or watching another one of my videos. Thanks. That being said, spoilers ahead for Don Bluth's Anastasia, real-life history, and Anastasia, the musical adaptation.
Grandma, it's me, Anastasia.
It's only natural that Anastasia is the opener for this series. She is, after all, the most famous in modern day. The legend of the missing princess Anastasia captured the imagination of many. The 1997 animated movie is probably the best known telling of the story, but as I already mentioned, it's not anywhere near the most accurate. And not just because Anastasia lived. Now, in order to better understand the film Anastasia, I'm going to try and summarize the events that led to the real Anastasia's death and what happened right after her death. Just a few things to bear in mind. There was a lot happening at once in Russia, and it is honestly a bit confusing, so I am definitely simplifying the details for the sake of brevity. If you want to know more, I strongly encourage you to research it for yourself. The real Grand Duchess Anastasia was the daughter of Tsar Nicholas II and his wife, Tsarina Alexandra. The movie actually had her family down pat. She had 3 older sisters, Olga, Tatiana, and Maria, and a younger brother, Alexei. However, Anastasia was much older than her animated counterpart in 1917. The real Anastasia was 16 when the revolution began and 17 when she died, as opposed to the 8 years old she is depicted as during the start of the movie and the 18 when she's older. It's like a reverse Pocahontas. The movie creators probably made her younger to emphasize her innocence, and maybe to make it more believable that people wouldn't recognize her after the time skip. For a princess, the real-life Anastasia had a lot in common with any other teenager. She took pictures of herself with her brownie camera, she had a dog named Jemmy, and a close relationship with her siblings. She is described as having been a fun and free-spirited girl who cared less about her appearance than her sisters. It's easy to imagine her laughing with her sisters and running around the palace. The movie version of Anastasia has a lot in common with the real-life princess, and it's clear that they had based a lot of her personality on the anecdotes of those who knew her. So what was going on in Russia? In February 1917, Russia was on the cusp of civil war. The Russian Empire stood as the 3rd largest empire in human history. Its government was a unitary parliamentary semi-constitutional monarchy, which basically means the Tsar worked with a parliament to make decisions for the entire empire. This had been a recent change, as prior to 1906 they were an absolute monarchy, where the Tsar made all the decisions. Unfortunately, Nicholas II, Anastasia's father, was a pretty ineffective ruler, and his ineffectiveness is what had led to the initial change in 1906. But things hadn't improved in 10 years. Russia was still failing to industrialize properly, and there were extreme food and fuel shortages as a result of World War I. World War I was in some ways the true killer of the monarchy in Russia. What happened there is such a disaster of hubris and misorganization. Tsar Nicholas II led to the death of over 1 million Russian soldiers because of wildly incompetent leadership and conflicting advice from his military heads. And, since he was no military man, well, tragically the empire faced some of the worst losses of any nation in the war. Their soldiers didn't have enough weapons or supplies and were basically marched to the slaughterhouse as a result. The people were angry. Their sons and fathers were dead. Inflation was mounting. The peasants wanted land reforms, and basically Nicholas II was far from the perfect king the animated movie depicted him to be. Like, he seems like a nice guy and a wonderful father, but dang was he not cut out for this job. As a consequence of his ineptitude, many different factions of different political ideologies together led the February Revolution of the Russian Empire, and the royal imperial family was deposed and kept under house arrest. What followed was a second revolution in November 1917, led by the Marxist Bolsheviks. This revolution would ultimately lead to the creation of the Soviet Union after the initially minority Bolsheviks took control of Russia. The Bolsheviks had a strong platform of peace, land, and bread. Basically, leaving World War I, reforming the land and giving it to the people, and making sure everyone had food. This no-brainer strategy made them very appealing to the peasantry and led to them skyrocketing into power. From 1917 to 1922, the country was the, mouthful to say, Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. And during this time, the Bolsheviks spent their time smushing out any opposing ideologies, putting together a secret police, and finally industrializing the country, allowing the nation to catch up with the rest of the world. And fortunately for my tongue, in 1922, a treaty was signed with the surrounding socialist or communist countries who were once part of the old Russian Empire, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or Soviet Union for short, was born. The Soviet Union would last from 1922 to 1991, and it wasn't a great place to live. Sorry to any socialist or communist diehards out there, this place sucked. And that's not just my American education saying that for the record. I didn't read everything George Orwell ever wrote for nothing. So, what happened to the Russian imperial family during all of this? Following the February Revolution, the Romanov family was held under house arrest for roughly a year at Alexander Palace. Then, in April of 1918, they were moved to the House of Special Purpose, Ipatiev House in Siberia, a merchant's home claimed by the government for the purpose of housing the imperial family. They would spend 78 days imprisoned in this home before finally being executed. The party consisted of Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Tsarina Alexandra, their 5 children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei, as well as their remaining servants, court physician Eugene Botkin, lady-in-waiting Anna Demidova, footman Alexei Trupp, and head cook Ivan Kharitonov. Of the children, the oldest, Olga, was 22 at the time of her death, and the youngest, Alexei, was 13. The decision to execute the imperial family was made by the Ural Executive Committee in June of 1918. Lenin was in attendance, but it is unclear if he was the one who recommended the execution. It's likely the decision to execute the imperial family was made due to fears of rescue attempts and to the danger that their survival posed to the continuing regime. And, on July 16, 1918, the deed was done. From this point on, it's going to get a little graphic. Don't worry, there's no pictures, but if you don't want to hear a summary of the murder and subsequent burials, please skip ahead to the marker where I start back up again with the aftermath. Don't worry, I completely understand if you don't want to hear the details. That being said, let's continue. The family were told that they were being moved to a new location and were ordered to dress and wait in the basement for the truck that would transport them. The Tsarina and Alexei were given chairs while they waited. Alexandra because she wasn't feeling well, and Alexei due to his hemophilia. Anastasia had her dog Jemmy with her. A secret police execution squad entered the small basement, and the order by the UEC was read aloud to the Romanovs. Nikolai Alexandrovich, in the view of the fact that your relatives are continuing their attack on Soviet Russia, the Ural Executive Committee has decided to execute you. The family barely had a chance to react before they opened fire. 20 minutes later, and all 11 people were dead. The execution was sloppy, and according to eyewitness reports, most of the children survived the first wave of bullets. Roughly 70 bullets were fired, and at least one of the shooters was drunk. Those who didn't die from bullet shots were then bayoneted to death before being shot again. It is theorized that the women didn't die as quickly because they had sewn their diamond jewelry into their undergarments, creating a shield. Next, the bodies were loaded onto a truck and moved to their first burial location, a mine shaft. The bodies were stripped and doused in sulfuric acid to disfigure them. Then, a series of grenades were dropped on them to further disfigure them and to attempt to collapse the mine shaft. The mine shaft was shallower than initially realized and couldn't properly cover the bodies. And so, the next day it was decided that the bodies were to be moved to another, deeper mine shaft. Only there were concerns that it would take too long to take them there undiscovered. While moving the bodies to the new gravesite, the truck they were in got stuck in the mud, and the soldiers, tired and in a foul mood, decided now to instead bury the bodies by the side of the road they were stuck in. Once again, the bodies were further disfigured, but this time, the grave was covered by railroad ties to disguise it. 2 of the bodies, those belonging to Alexei and one of the women, were separated from the rest to be buried at another location in order to confuse anyone who found the mass grave with only 9 bodies in it. These 2 were taken 70 meters away, burned, smashed, and then buried. Over the next 84 days, 14 members of the Romanovs' extended family would also be murdered, along with 13 members of their imperial households. Much like the imperial family, these poor souls were also told that they were being transported before meeting their unfortunate ends. The one survivor of the execution would be Alexei's dog, Joy, who lived entirely because he stayed quiet and hid during the murders. The Soviet Union initially only reported that Tsar Nicholas was dead. They knew it would cause unrest if people heard that the women and children were killed as well. As the years went on, they spread some confusing misinformation that made it no wonder that people began to wonder if one of the Romanovs had survived. The Empress Dowager Maria, known as Grandmama in the film, in her grief denied their deaths and believed that they had to have survived until her death in 1928 at the age of 80. Over the years, a handful of very convincing Anastasia and Alexei impersonators popped up. These imposters served as the basis for the plot of the 1997 animated movie. However, the movie is not based on anyone in particular. In 1979, the burial site was uncovered by amateur archaeologists who kept their discovery a secret until the collapse of the Soviet Union. In July 1991, the bodies were exhumed, and using DNA from Prince Philip and lots of other cool forensic anthropology evidence, it was established that 5 of the 9 recovered bodies belonged to the Russian imperial family, and that the other 4 were their servants. But 2 of the bodies were missing, that of Alexei and one of his 2 sisters, either Anastasia or Maria. In 2007, almost 20 years later, the missing bodies were discovered and identified as being members of the Romanov family. And with their discovery, it was undeniable. Anastasia and her little brother Alexei had not survived the terrible murder of their family. The entire family has been canonized by the Russian Orthodox Church. The remains of Nicholas II and the others found with him have been interred in St. Petersburg St. Peter and Paul Cathedral, where they rest with their ancestors. Alexei and his sister have not yet been interred with the rest of their family. The Russian Orthodox Church has requested further testing to confirm the identities of the remains before going forward with a funeral. However, despite this, it is widely accepted that the remains are indeed those of Alexei and either Anastasia or Maria. Which brings us now back to the animated film. Released in 1997, Anastasia was directed and produced by Don Bluth and Gary Goldman. The movie was 20th Century Fox's first animated movie to be produced in-house and was animated by Fox Animation Studios. The script is based loosely on the Fox-owned 1956 live-action movie Anastasia, with elements of Pygmalion thrown in for good measure. When choosing a story to adapt, the studio had to choose a property Fox already owned, and they were apparently presented with about a dozen options. Among those options were The King and I, My Fair Lady, and Anastasia. Bluth and Goldman both felt that they couldn't improve on the previous adaptations of The King and I or My Fair Lady, and so they instead chose Anastasia and threw in some My Fair Lady elements as an update to the plot. The moment I learned this, everything made sense. It clarified the bizarre story choice, and it is also just a beautiful illustration of corporate wackadoodle. Fox obviously didn't want to spend a ton of money on obtaining the rights to any new story, so by using something they already owned, they could cut costs on development. The problem is that they might not own a story that's actually sparkly kids movie material, and Anastasia was the closest thing to that in their collection. Bluth and Goldman worked with what they had. They quickly established that they were making a kids movie, and so there would be dramatic changes to the original 1956 movie's story and to real-life history. Communism and everything that comes with it would not be featured in the movie, except as a set dressing. Rasputin would be the villain, not the Bolsheviks. Anastasia would be younger, and the story of what happened to her family would be greatly sanitized. There would be a cute dog and a talking bat. Honestly, on learning the story choice limitations Fox had them working with, the changes are completely understandable. These guys wanted to make a kids movie, and Fox left them with very little wiggle room. I have a lot of sympathy for the animators for the shit Fox did to them. We're talking about expecting Disney Renaissance level movies with half the budget, a fraction of the staff, and a much smaller time frame to boot. There is a reason Anastasia, the crappy Talking Bat spinoff, and Titan AE are the only movies Fox Studios ever made. Those corporate jerks treated the artists like machines, and everyone suffered for it. It makes me so angry for them. Watching interviews with the creators and seeing how wildly passionate they are for their work and the level of detail they put into the characters and sets just breaks my heart. I just wish that they were allowed to make a story other than Anastasia so that they could make the fun, sparkly kids movie they wanted to make in the first place. The production of Anastasia began in 1994, just 3 years after the discovery of the first grave. This means that the movie exists in an interesting window of time between the discovery of the first grave and the revelations brought by the second one. Since the discovery, interest in the Romanov tragedy was up, and theories as to what happened to Anastasia were as well. Why wasn't her body with the others? Maybe she really had survived. In the making of Anastasia, a short film released alongside the movie, Gary Goldman says it himself. The story of Anastasia is almost a myth at this point. I mean, no one knows whether the girl was lost with her family or not during the revolution of 1918. For some reason, Alexei never figures into this, despite also not having been found. Probably because princesses are prettier, Anastasia has the cooler name, and as the male heir, it seems extra unlikely that the Bolsheviks would have let him slip away alive. For whatever reason, Anastasia became the centerpiece of the Romanov tragedy and a myth that quietly persisted throughout the generations. As a 90s baby, I vaguely recall being about 8 years old and reading a kids' magazine article about the long-lost Princess Anastasia. I remember then going and asking my mom about it because it just sounded too magical to be real, and then being amazed that yes, it was true. They hadn't found her body. She might still be alive. It was a real-life fairy tale. I spent the rest of that afternoon daydreaming that she'd somehow run away to Ohio, because I was from Ohio. Fast forward to high school, and a second grave was found. I remember there being no fanfare, no revival of the movie or other Anastasia retellings. Just a collective sense of, oh, that's a shame. No one ever actually believed that she might be alive. We just all wanted to believe in hope and good, and to feed our inner child. And I think that's an integral part of the identity of this story. Anastasia is a real-life fairy tale. Despite the budget limitations, Anastasia was developed with cutting-edge technology. 3D models were used to fill in crowds. Difficult-to-draw objects were replaced with 3D models, and cells were colored digitally rather than painted by hand. Things that would have taken them months to do suddenly could be done in a fraction of the time, and I think that the use of technology is part of what put them on a level playing field with Disney's weaker films. A Rumor in St. Petersburg is a textbook example of using CGI models to replicate crowds. And the nightmare scene shows the power of a computer-powered camera with dramatic wraparounds and movement over a CGI set that just wouldn't have been possible in ye olden days. There are some places where the new technology shows its weaknesses, though. The Beauty and the Beast camera-like effects are usually pretty brief and are therefore distracting and make you think about Beauty and the Beast. The bicycle scene has some blatantly unfiltered 3D model bikes that leave you wondering why they didn't just draw the actual bike. In Once Upon a December, the crowd shifts back and forth between 3 different styles of background characters: painted, stagnant, and 3D modeled. You probably wouldn't notice them unless you were looking, but the style of the background characters shifted every few seconds, and it's definitely symptom of the limited budget. I think that had they chosen just one style, it would have been fine. Personally, I prefer the painted figures because they look more in line with the nightmare dream sequences painterly look, and because it's really distracting how the CGI modeled figures don't match the stagnant ones they're placed against. While using technology to save time is definitely a feature of this movie, it isn't without controversy. Most of the film was animated using what's called rotoscoping, an animation technique where they filmed live-action actors performing the scene, and then they traced over their movements. It's a pretty controversial technique in the animation industry, understandably seen as cheating by the majority of people in the field. As with all things art, there's a big difference between referencing and tracing. Almost every animated movie ever is made with some sort of live-action reference. No one other than a 14-year-old on DeviantArt expects you to be able to draw something you've never seen out of your head. Instead, it's about how you use your reference material. A lot of the time, rotoscoping looks pretty obvious and pretty bad, like traced artwork. Don Bluth was really into rotoscoping though. Virtually all of his films feature it, and I'm not sure why. I haven't been able to find an interview with him on the topic, but I have been able to glean a few guesses. Since it's usually used on human or scary creatures, rather than just things that are hard to animate, I think Don might feel that using rotoscoping as a technique makes them look more realistic. Don's characters, while definitely having that doe-eyed beauty look that Disney created, are drawn with more realism. They have nasolabial folds and other facial features usually omitted by Disney for the sake of attractiveness. Their clothing is realistic. Dimitri spends the movie wearing long underwear under his shirt, and the movie doesn't hide it. For Don Bluth, it's less about idealization and more about making animated characters look and move realistically. Because the movie had a limited budget, the time and money-saving nature of rotoscoping worked well in their favor. We can see in the making of video that they clearly were trying to do whatever scenes they could the standard way, and the overall skill of the animators makes the rotoscoping work. They didn't overdo it on the frame count, and they allowed fabric and hair to move cartoonishly. It's clear that we are not looking at lazy people who decided to cheat to make an animated movie, unlike some other horrifying examples in animation history. The only scenes that stuck out to me as a bit yikes are the ones where Anastasia's wearing the blue sparkly dress, because suddenly it's clear that that is a cartoon head on a real-ass woman's body. Ugh. As a Rochester native, I also get a kick out of the fact that it was Kodak film and software that was used for the movie. Unfortunately, a movie can have the most fascinating developmental history in the world, and that still won't excuse it being a bad movie or an inherently bad idea. Like, obviously I don't want them to show a blow-by-blow accurate history of what happened to real-life Anastasia. That wouldn't be fun for anyone. I still want the myth, the legend, the mystery. Just like, with a little more history? My history nerd grievances aside, the story is shaky. even without the erasure of history. Like, right from the get-go, why didn't the literal demons of hell know that Anastasia was alive? Shouldn't they, as all-powerful demons, just know that? Did they really need her to show up at the palace for them to recognize that? I mean, it's a blood curse, right? Shouldn't they just be aware of anyone with that bloodline? Rasputin seriously got ripped off at the unholy power dealership. Why do Vlad and Dmitri live in the palace? How did Anastasia and Grandmama get as far as the train station? Why does no one ever question all of the weird Rasputin-caused accidents that started happening around them? How can they afford all these different travel expenses? How did Grandma know about Dmitri's scam scheme? Why does Anya's personality do a complete 180 from fun spunky girl to boring generic lady the moment the I Can Learn to Do It song finishes? She learned manners. She didn't download a new personality. And I know, it's for the sake of the story, Swift. Don't take it too seriously. I can't help it. I can hand wave one or two oddities, but when they start to stack up, it's a sign of a bad script. And that's without pointing out the weird little things, like the dress Dmitri gave Anastasia, completely transforming into a different dress in the very next scene. Like, it's just careless. At least the jokes are funny, most of the time. I hate Bartok. I hate that he has a spin-off. Why does he look like Brain from Pinky and the Brain, but as a deformed bat? Ugh, I feel bad being so harsh, because I know a lot of people like this movie. But man, it really just comes off as a pale imitation of a Disney movie. It doesn't even have anything different or unique about it to help it stand out. It really makes you wish that they had been allowed to make a movie using a story of their choosing. There are things they did that I think are very cool, like Anastasia's yellow dresses. The yellow court dress seen in Once Upon a December is based on a dress that the real Anastasia wore as a child, which makes it perfect to be the dress that Anastasia half remembers wearing. The later yellow dress is a recreation of it, but restyled to reflect her being an adult now. The yellow dress is an amazing detail, and I love it. There are other details like this throughout the movie, like the paintings in the palace are based on real ones or on photographs of the royal family. The goofy drawing Anastasia did as a child of a girl with black hair is one that the real Anastasia did. I'd love it if the movie had more of this. And if you're wondering, the other dresses in the movie are complete nonsense. As much as I love the sparkly blue dress, it's an evening gown from the 90s, not the late 20s. And the boat blue dress is straight out of the mid-30s or 40s, so it's also not period appropriate. Stylistically, the movie lacks an identity. It looks a lot like Disney. It clearly wants to be Disney, but it obviously isn't Disney. There are multiple moments in the movie that really capture that reality. The dancing scene on the boat is such a dupe of the Beauty and the Beast dancing scene, it hurts. The opening is bizarrely similar to Hunchbacks, with a city pan on a famous building, followed by an establishing song and dance number. The cute animals that frolic around Anya during their hike in the woods are extremely Disney-like, especially the squirrels, and make me question why anyone says Anya is not like those other princesses. Her dress transformation in Once Upon a December does the same spiral sparkle effect that Cinderella does, although that one I'm willing to write off as a reference. I could keep going, but it's honestly sad. The parts of the movie that do have their own identity are really cool, like most of Paris or the nightmare scene, but they are few and far between. It makes it easy for me to understand why so many people have mistaken this movie for a Disney one. The music is definitely the highlight of the film, although some of the lyrics could use some work. The dash of cologne for that smell line in The Dark of the Night single-handedly ruins the song. Some of the others suffer from being a little too familiar, but in an adjacent sort of way. Vlad's song during the boat dance is a man's version of Beauty and the Beast, just with a different large-framed parental adult singing. If I Can Learn to Do It is a song where My Fair Lady shows. It feels like a Julie Andrews musical beat track. It's cute, it's fun, it's apparently also the hardest song on the track, and the singers do awesome. There's a rumor in St. Petersburg, pisses me off and mystifies me, from the history erasing lyrics to the man holding a literal newspaper on Anastasia, and yet insisting that it's a secret rumor that she might be alive. This song just has a lot of mismatched imagery and annoying lyrics. I could probably write a small paper on it alone. All that being said, In the Dark of the Night and Once Upon a December are hands down the best songs in the movie. No competition. The imagery, the performance, the lyrics. There's a reason that they are the songs people remember. Which, altogether, means we have a shaky plot, some lukewarm aesthetics, and a couple good earworms, which puts the movie on a balance beam between mediocre and good. Does it float like a little boat? Unfortunately, no. It's just a nice movie. It's no masterpiece. I think I like it, I just don't love it. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be some subversive masterpiece to be good. It's just fun, and I think it's important for people to remember that that's okay. You can like things, even if they aren't, quote-unquote, masterpieces. Although, there is one other thing that baffles me. Puka the dog is an enigma to me, who is getting a tangent of his own. This is probably one of those irrelevant things I'm hyperfixating on, but I can't help it. What is Puka meant to represent? Who is Puka? Where did he come from? In case you forgot this utterly forgettable character, Puka is Anastasia's dog. He's a stray puppy of cartoonish breed who always manages to show up at the right time in the right place. In theory, he's a perfectly normal dog with some cute animal companion tendencies. Or is he? Let's cover every one of Puka's movements. Anya first meets him when asking for a sign that she was okay to go to St. Petersburg, and then the goofy little dog pops up out of the snow and acts as that sign. He is able to see the ghost figures that appear during Once Upon a December. He immediately trusts Vlad, but is initially yippy at the less well-intentioned Dmitri. He is the only person to see Rasputin's minions that attack the train. He alerts Anya to the box of explosives on the train, despite being a theoretically illiterate puppy. He smiles when Vlad confesses to being a member of the imperial court, but glares at Dmitri when Dmitri clearly only cares about money. He subsequently barks and growls later when Dmitri and Anya go in for their first kiss. On the boat, Puka digs in Dmitri's bag and presents the music box to Anya. He licks her toes, which is definitely on some website. When Anya goes sleepwalking, Puka conveniently wakes up and wakes Dmitri. Puka is barred from entering the Dowager's house, probably because he would be too plot useful and would drag the Dowager in by her ears. So instead he watches from the windowsill and shows concern for Anastasia during her interview with Sophie. Because dogs don't go to opera houses, we don't see Puka again until Anastasia's presentation party, where Puka is dressed up in a crown and sword, which he quickly shakes off. Even Puka is sad as Dmitri says goodbye, his good intentions finally realized. At the party, Puka sits next to the throne sulking. The next scene, Puka is back to his plot advancing, running outside and barking. Puka leads Anastasia through a maze of greenery where Rasputin attacks, chasing them onto the bridge. While Rasputin is chucking Anastasia and Dmitri around like ragdolls, Puka is the one who straight up bites the zombified old wizard before going toe-to-toe with one of Rasputin's minions. He howls during the Dmitri death scare, barks during the second almost kiss, and brings Anastasia her tiara as a reminder that she and Dmitri arbitrarily can't be together. Fortunately, they get together and Puka hides his face in his ears as they finally kiss. The end. Mechanically, Puka's there to look cute, to let the audience know how they should feel about certain things, and to act as a plot progression tool. In some of the early concept art, he isn't even a dog, but a cat. Now, the real Anastasia had a black Cavalier King Charles Spaniel named Jemmy, but Puka obviously isn't Jemmy. He'd be too old for starters. It would have been cute if Puka was implied to be Jemmy's puppy, but obviously Puka is no King Charles Spaniel. There is a painting of a spaniel in the family portrait, which I believe is meant to be Alexi's dog, Joy, the Cocker Spaniel who was the one survivor of the execution. Like the dog in the portrait, Joy had a white stripe across his face and a white belly. Anastasia's dog, Jemmy, meanwhile, was solid black. Based on aesthetics alone, Puka probably isn't related to either of them. Puka was probably just intended to be a cute, generic dog. But that's boring. My crackpot theory is that this dog is not a dog, but rather either an angelic being or the reincarnation of Anastasia's brother Alexei. Maybe both. We have a story here of demonic beings, familiars, and evil wizards who sell their souls to hell. If Bartok is Rasputin's unholy familiar, then Puka is Anastasia's guardian angel sent to help protect her against him. Puka's being aware of Rasputin's minions and trying to steer her on the path of finding her true identity contributes to this theory. His being Alexei stems in part from his appearance and his decidedly brotherly concern for Anya. He gets mad at Dmitri whenever he flirts with her, and like Puka, Alexei is seen to have blue eyes and shaggy hair that covers one eye. And so that's what I'm going to choose to believe, that Puka is Alexei reincarnated as a guardian pup, helping Anastasia out on her journey, because that makes infinitely more sense than him pointing out explosives to her as a literal dog. Glad I got that out of my system. Which brings us now to the 2017 musical adaptation. God damn the musical. I wish I could get the 2 hours of my life I wasted watching it back. I wish it didn't give me a headache that lasted for 4 hours straight afterwards. I wish it had never been made. Everything bad I said about the movie, I take back. The musical is an abomination unto man. It took every clever and good thing about the original movie and ran it through the shredder. It is literally the worst musical I have ever seen. It actually made me appreciate the movie way more because the way it destroyed everything good made it all the more clear how much good this mediocre little kids movie had going for it. Originally, I wasn't going to cover the musical because, like a lot of Broadway shows, I assumed any recordings of it would be way too hard to find. No, I found one. Not the original cast, but I think it's the tour one. And I have never hated an adaptation of something more in my entire life. What I knew about the musical before watching it was that it ditched Rasputin in favor of a more realistic villain, a Bolshevik officer named Gleb, that it received mixed reviews, and that all of the magical elements were gone from the movie in favor of realism. You'd think my history-loving self would like that, but in this case, no. By removing all of the magic and elements of coincidence from the story, they broke the suspension of disbelief that we had about how the heck Anastasia survived. Instead, we were left sitting, forced to watch a ham-fisted lesson on Russian history punch its way through a sparkly kids movie. What we have here is a serious adaptation of a sparkly kids movie that was already an adaptation of a serious real-life story. Folks, it doesn't work that way. The Hunchback musical was able to go darker because the movie left room for that, and so the musical could better explore its themes. Anastasia did not. All I wanted was some acknowledgement that Lenin and pals happened, not Anya getting interrogated by the secret police and a guy getting off on the train by them. And just, oh my god, where do I even begin? The characters, the plot holes that show up 12 minutes in, the horrible rehash of the music, the illogical pacing and reordering of the entire story, the sexism? Let's start with Dmitri, because the changes to him are central to the ruining of the story. So in the movie, Dmitri was a kitchen boy in the palace who saved Anastasia by opening a secret passage and helping her escape. During the escape, she loses the music box, which Dmitri picks up and saves. Fast forward to the present, and he's already well into the Anastasia con prep with Vlad. Ultimately, it's the music box and Anastasia's account of escaping that make him fully believe that she is the real Anastasia. In the musical, Dmitri is a street rat who had no connection to the palace or the royal family, but one time, when he was 10, he saw a parade that Anastasia was in, and they made eye contact long enough for her to smile and for him to bow. And that's their big connection. Her remembering the bowing is what makes him fully convinced that she's Anastasia. He also only just decided to pull this con, which really slows down the storytelling. Well, what about the music box then, you ask? So, the music box, somehow, makes its way to the streets of St. Petersburg, where a dude is selling it on the street. Dmitri buys it for 2 cans of beans on a whim because he knows he needs something actually Romanov for the con to work. Kill me. It literally makes no sense. We literally see in the first scene of the damn musical, child Anastasia go back for the music box like she does in the movie. Only we don't see her drop it. So how the hell did it make it to some peddler? And how is it that after 10 years, it's now being sold on the streets as a genuine Romanov artifact? And what are the chances of Dmitri buying it? It makes no sense. For some reason, they decided it was unrealistic for Dmitri to have this connection to Anastasia, or to have the music box, and so they instead came up with a way more contrived and unlikely way for him to have the music box, and a way more impersonal connection to Anastasia. Well, you see, that's because Gleb, yes, you heard that, Gleb, that's his actual name, got that honor. Gleb is the totally new character and villain of the story. He's a Bolshevik officer, and he loves Russia and the cause. And Gleb, special Gleb, his daddy was one of the men who shot the entire Romanov family dead in that basement. And he heard it all from the next room over. Why would you bring a 10-year-old boy there? Who would say, all right, honey, I'm going to bring little Gleb with me to the execution for Bring Your Kid to Work Day. He can play cards in the next room over. What? Gleb's dad later kills himself after being racked with guilt over having killed the imperial family. But Gleb has convinced himself that his dad was a hero who did what had to be done in this harsh world of revolutions. Gleb also has a crush on Anya, and actually meets her before Dmitri does in this godforsaken musical, when he bumps into her on the street and comforts her after she has a PTSD attack from thinking she heard a gunshot. I shit you not. The writer has such a hard-on for Gleb. He's clearly meant to be some kind of weird Aaron Burr-Javert fusion dance, but unlike them, he doesn't die or go to jail at the end. No, he actually gets fully redeemed, which we'll come back to. Vlad was technically a member of the imperial court, but get this, he conned his way in. He's a commoner and a lech, and basically not at all the older father-like figure who Dmitri and Anya both lean on. He went from the glue at the heart of the movie to comedic relief. Anya is destroyed. So one weird thing about this musical is that Anya is only the main character in name. A lot of her important scenes are cut or have been moved in such a way that they lose the importance of her growth or become about another character, usually Vlad or Dmitri. For example, Learn to Do It. Rather than being a midpoint song where Anya has fully decided that she's ready to learn the ropes of being the Grand Duchess Anastasia, is now placed at the very beginning, and it's just about Vlad and Dmitri tricking her into being their puppet. Journey to the Past, her I Want/establishing song, is now placed in the middle of the musical, meaning it takes that long to get an idea of what's actually going on inside her head. Her personality is no longer a spunky, rough-and-tumble girl who grew up in an orphanage with no memories. Instead, she is literally a waif. She rambles incoherently upon meeting Dimitri and Vlad at the theater about having seen shows here, and honestly comes off as crazy. She has 3 separate PTSD attacks where she throws herself to the ground in a wide-eyed stare. She squeals in a silly, girly way that's hard to explain, but basically just further weakens her character. She is freaking stupid. Like the secret police are on the train and just shot a guy, and she almost says out loud that she's the Grand Duchess Anastasia. But luckily, Dimitri silences her. This is not the Anya we saw in the movie. And the ending only made it infinitely worse. So Gleb has been sent by the secret police to kill Anya if it turns out that she's the actual Anastasia. He follows them all the way to Paris and keeps just barely missing them until finally, at her big reveal party, he corners her and pulls a gun. And it's just unreal. She just yells at him emotionally about how he should feel about the death of her family and how if she dies, she'll get to be with them again before collapsing in a heap of feminine emotion. And Gleb, poor Gleb, is so stirred by that feminine emotion that he decides not to kill her and not to repeat his father's mistakes. And then Anya forgives him, and he goes back to St. Petersburg and tells the Bolsheviks that there is no Anastasia. And so, yay, they all live happily ever after. Yeah, that's the ending they came up with to replace the battle with Rasputin. You know, the one where she goes toe-to-toe with an all-powerful undead warlock? Gone! Have feminine emotions instead. How is it that the movie that came out in 1997 is less sexist than the musical that came out in 2017? How? Like, they even gave her the shitty little fight sequence in Act 1 where she and Dimitri fight off these random drunk thugs, and Dimitri's all, wow, you're a great fighter, winky face. And so you think, oh, I bet that will come up in the final fight. No, it does not. They gave us one of those strong woman fighting scenes to make it clear that their female protagonist is a hashtag strong female character, which is then immediately nullified by that ending. And unfortunately, to get to that ending, you have to watch 2 literal hours of suffering. Highlights include Rasputin's theme being used for both Soviet Russia and bad things, but also sad Russian expatriates being homesick, which is a good thing. The color red being used to symbolize bad things, because Russia. But then Anastasia's pretty princess dress is red. The love song from the boat scene turned into a song where Vlad and Sophie, now named Lily, recount how they had sex once. I'm serious. And then they try to reprise it anyways for Dimitri and Anya later, but all you can think about is gross old people sex. The Paris song, having the comedy and ooh la la's removed because they might be offensive to French people, I think, but then immediately followed by drunken vodka-drinking Russians in funny hats. The literal diamond that was sewn into Anya's clothes and found at the hospital where she was treated and apparently hasn't been sold, stolen, or anything for the convenience of the plot so that Anya can use it to buy them train tickets. Oh, and her name was given to her by the hospital. I always assumed it was Anya as a broken, half-remembered shortening of Anastasia. Not in the musical. In the musical, these nameless doctors just happen to give her a name that functions as a nickname for Anastasia. There's this part at the beginning where they're showing the lovely imperial royal family all dancing and being cute, and little Alexei does a solo dance and, just collapses to the ground. And that's supposed to show his hemophilia. Which doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way at all. It's hard to keep a straight face writing this, because it's so bad, it's hilarious, it's even real. Like the music box, right? So in the movie, she has the key necklace, which is needed to wind the music box. That doesn't exist in the musical. In the musical, Dimitri was just too dumb to figure out that the winding mechanism was on the bottom. But Anya, so strong, female Anya, found it immediately. And then Once Upon a December happens, on a random street, not the palace. And I guess Dimitri just watches her hallucinate for a few minutes. This musical struggles really bad with its musical rules. Sometimes scenes are purely symbolic and imply something happened, but other times they are 100% real and fully happened, and it's not always easy to tell when due to the very sparse sets. The sets aren't even real. They're just giant projections with crappy animated snow falling or terrifying pan shots of the Eiffel Tower. In the ballet scene, they swapped out the ballet they were seeing from Cinderella to Swan Lake. I know what you're thinking. What's the big deal? Isn't Swan Lake a famous Russian ballet? So, Cinderella actually worked weirdly better symbolically. It's about a commoner becoming a princess, but also it's about a prince who openly marries a commoner, which is part of Anya's conflict since she's afraid that she won't be able to be with Dmitri. Swan Lake, not so much. If you've seen the old animated movie, it's close enough to give you an idea of what the plot's supposed to do. What's extra weird about them using Swan Lake, though, is they did it wrong. They have these ballerinas dancing a made-up scene that doesn't happen in the real ballet, which matters because they mean for the ballet characters to represent the actual characters. So Swan, Odette, dances with the prince, who shows up when Dmitri sings his little bit. And then the evil wizard Rothbart shows up when Gleb, who somehow got a ticket to the ballet, sings his bit. So we know that Swan is Anya, the prince is Dmitri, and Rothbart is Gleb. For some reason, they had the ballerinas dance it as though the prince and Rothbart are competing for the Swan's affection, which for anyone who knows anything Swan-like, isn't the case. But it is the case if we want to pretend that Dmitri, Gleb, and Anya are a realistic love triangle. It's obvious they picked Swan Lake because it's extremely recognizable and has 2 male characters. They just didn't give a damn about the actual plot or implications those characters bring with them. But what's extra terrible is that they almost could have done something clever. They could have had Rothbart lead to the prince and Swan's death like he's supposed to. Instead, they just bow and dance as if Swan Lake has a happy ending. It could have been foreshadowing for how Gleb, the bad guy, is going to destroy Anya and Dmitri. But no, instead it's just shipping! Shipping! They are wasting real ballerinas and real musical screen time on shipping their OC with Anastasia! Because they freaking love Gleb. They have Gleb do this whole Hamilton-inspired ass sequence where a nameless soldier puts his coat on him before he begins his journey to Paris. And another nameless soldier hands him the gun. Like, it's downright hilarious. They think this is Hamilton. And at the ending finale, they do it again. Where they have Gleb do that thing Jefferson does where he admits Hamilton was actually cool. Only, instead, it's to explain that Anastasia is okay. And that Gleb lied to the Soviets. It's the exact same intonation and delivery. Like, it hurts. And then the costumes. For whatever reason, they refused to put Vlad, Dmitri, and Anya in any semblance of colors. And so during basically any scene, they're in their drab browns and neutrals and blend right into all the chorus singers in their drab browns and neutrals. Then we get to Paris, where they finally wear color. And then so does the rest of Paris. Like, they don't make any color specific to our main cast. And so once again, you have to look for them in the crowd of singers. The one dress from the movie that appears in the musical is the blue sparkle dress, which is hilarious entirely because it's the most period and appropriate dress, and it's supposedly more realistic and accurate retelling of Anastasia. The red princess dress just baffles me. It's got the open skirt thing, so the actress can theoretically move and dance around, but then it's strapless, so she actually can't. And even then, she doesn't, because she just stands there and wails emotionally at Gleb in it. And then design-wise, it's truly a modern prom dress, and not even a little bit excusable, unlike the blue dress where you can at least find some 1920s evening dresses that kind of fit the bill. The red dress is especially jarring when it's juxtaposed against the white-clad, properly dressed ghosts of the dead Romanovs. And why is it red? Like, red is literally the color of communism, the thing Anya hates that destroyed her family. Why did they choose red? I understand not going with the light yellow so it shows up better on stage, but they could have gone with blue. Blue is like Anya's alt color, but instead they went with the one color that makes the least amount of sense. The choreography is depressing. I'm not a showbiz person, but I know bad choreography when I see it. All of the actors are clumped together, their movements are weird, and half the time it's hard to tell what the heck they're even supposed to be doing. The scene where the Romanovs are killed is especially funny because they just kind of dance, like mildly scared before all one at a time running off the set. It's so dumb. They frequently skipped explanatory scenes. Like, we don't actually see Anya agree to be Anastasia. She just starts being Anastasia for some reason. And the same thing happens again with the grandma when we actually don't get to see her meet the Empress Dowager for the first time. Like, for being the title character, they tried to keep Anya off the stage. It's like they wanted her to be this mystical girl rather than the real girl that the movie presented us with, which is only my least favorite thing in media. And I really wish I could get those 2 hours back. Do not, I repeat, do not watch this musical. I think a musical adaptation could have worked, and even once more historically influenced, if they let Dmitri keep his backstory, since without that backstory there is no story. It's even actually plausible. There was an actual kitchen boy who was friends with Alexei, who was taken away from Ipatiev house on the day of the execution. Dmitri could have been him. Done! Like, you don't even necessarily need Rasputin. I think he helps a lot with that suspension of disbelief thing. And I think that with some touch-ups, he could be a grade A villain. But they were so set on a real sympathetic villain that we got Gleb. And horrible, ham-fisted, rewritten songs that are somehow now even more monarchist than they were in the original. Like, we all know communist Russia was bad. You don't have to keep ramming it down our throats. We're intelligent viewers. But somehow, despite the insistence on historiosity, they completely failed to mention any of the failings of the Romanovs. If anything, they're even more perfect and more pristine than before, which is insanity. Like, telling a historical story is hard. History is multifaceted and not simple. If you're going to show how bad the Soviets were, you also have to show how bad things were before the Soviets. It's okay, we're not going to hate your precious characters if they aren't perfect. Honestly, if it were up to me, I would frame Tsar Nicholas as an inept leader, but a wonderful family man. Those ideas can coexist, and they did. And accepting that makes for a much more complex narrative by default. Unfortunately, we just got crappy songs about spies and how life used to be so much better before the revolution. And I got Gleb's stupid Neva Flow song stuck in my head for days. Days! So yeah, don't watch the musical. Overall, my feelings on Anastasia are complicated. The movie did a lot of good with very few resources, but also wasn't that great a story, and I wish it did more with history. The irresponsible disregard for history is something that gets excused by a lot of people, because it's a kids' movie. But honestly, it's a naive take. Consider that for a lot of people, this movie is their only exposure to the historical subject. People are lazy. They don't Google things, no matter how much we wish they did. People are also trusting. They might think that the only unrealistic parts of the movie are the fact that Anastasia's alive and there's magic, because everything is presented in a realistic setting. The musical may have used history as a set dressing, but it's so devoid of magic and storytelling that it's absolute garbage, and Puka isn't even in it. The key takeaway here is that we had a group of passionate and talented artists who wanted to make something that the whole family could enjoy, but ultimately their efforts were squashed or hindered by the corporate powers that be. An all too common tale, especially one that's relevant with the SAG-AFTRA strikes and layoffs by many companies. They have to do better. That being said, I hope you like my new look. My old sprites were never meant to be permanent and were drawn in like a week while making the Evil Queen Elena video. They were a pain to edit, didn't resize well, and honestly, I've always been able to do better. So when it was realized that I'd need to make more for an upcoming video, Fox and I agreed it was time for a total redo. So we sat down and made me some new me's. I personally love them, and I hope you do too. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. See you next time.